What's up, guys? Tom here from Metalloud, and welcome to part 5 of the Every Time I Die review series. This time we're taking a look at 2009's The New Junk Aesthetic. I'm all yours! Her calls will crack a pillow! Heart stands and I haven't been stopped! So first off with this album, let me start by saying that my experience with this and my feelings on this album are a little bit mixed. And here's why. When this album first came out, I was going through what I like to call a musical renaissance, a musical awakening, where I was starting to listen to bands I really hadn't before, hadn't really given them a chance, different genres, as well as going back to bands that I knew I liked and may have listened to casually, but I feel like I was able to experience them a little bit differently and appreciate them a little bit more. And definitely Every Time I Die was one of those bands, and this was actually one of those albums that really kind of kicked off. It came in right around that time that was happening in my life. I remember exactly what happened was I was in Best Buy one day because I was bored. I was just walking around and looking at different stuff, and I remember being in the CD aisle that they had and seeing this album, and the artwork really caught my attention. And I knew I'd listened to Every Time I Die. I'd heard Hot Damn in its entirety at one point. I'd been listening to a few songs here and there, but I was never really sat down and listened to Every Time I Die. I wasn't as big of a fan as I am today. And I knew I liked them, so I figured, why not? I mean, the album was on sale. They had the deluxe edition, which had the DVD as well, and that was going for about $10 at the time when it was like $16 normally. So I figured, what the hell, and I bought it and listened to it in my car, and I really liked it. I thought it was really interesting, and it kind of got me on the journey into Every Time I Die and where I am today, especially with that band in particular. And as you might have seen from some of the stuff I have up on my site and up on even the icon for YouTube, that's actually a picture of a tattoo that I have on my arm, which is the cover for this album. I really, really dug the album artwork so much that I wanted to make it a permanent part of myself, and it's currently on my right arm, upper shoulder right now, something that Brendan Urie also did, but, you know, I was first. So the reason I say I'm mixed on this album is because it really kind of, something about it feels soft to me. It doesn't feel as punchy of an Every Time I Die album as anything else that they've really done. And I feel like there's a lot of reasons for that, because it's also probably the most diverse album that they've done as well. It kind of pushed them in new different directions, and that they were taking it in. And I enjoyed that as well. As far as the album goes, what I don't really like about it, what really kind of sticks out to me as being not so much weak, but just not as, like I said, punchy as the other albums, is the actual way the guitars are tuned and produced and the way they sound on this album just feels a little bit weak. It does feel soft. It doesn't feel like it hits quite as hard as anything in the past. And that's not to say the guitar work itself is lacking in any way. I really feel this is more of a production issue than necessarily saying that they, you know, the guitar riffs are weak or anything like that, because you have some fantastic guitar riffs on here that are just extremely fast-paced, like Buffalo 666 or After One Quarter Turn of the Revolution, for instance. Is really kind of really hard-hitting, fast-paced guitar riffs, but just the way they come off when actually heard on this album, it feels weak. It doesn't, they don't really stand out as much, and I just don't like that about this album. I really kind of feel that makes it kind of feel a little bit boring at times. And the other issue is actually with the drumming on this album, which, if you know anything about the history of Every Time I Die, this was kind of a point where they lost their drummer, who just kind of up and left the band, and they described it basically as felt like they were playing with just a drum machine or a pre-recorded drumming backing versus actually somebody who was passionate about the music. And it kind of feels like that throughout this album. It kind of feels a little bit disconnected from the rest of the band. And it also doesn't quite hit as hard as anything, which in this case I feel is a mix of the production, but as well as his kind of lack of interest in this band at this point. And you really kind of get a sense of that here. And I think that's just kind of another thing that really kind of holds this album back a little bit. The other thing that I kind of don't really like as much on this album is kind of actually the vocal work, and this part is really mixed for me because it's actually a drastic improvement. I mean, Keith Buckley's been improving his vocal work throughout the albums. I mean, Gutter Phenomenon was a huge step up, and The Big Dirty was a big step up even from that. And here we get even some more soulful, clean vocals, some more diverse shouting styles, and even the screaming is just amazing on here. So he's really kind of improved things a lot. What I don't really like about it is a lot of the songs feel like they're just kind of lines thrown together, and that they're not necessarily a cohesive song, and they just feel like he's shouting lines for the sake of clever lines. And don't get me wrong, the lines themselves are fairly clever. I like them, but the songs themselves just feel like an excuse, like a vehicle for those lines versus actual cohesive songs. And that's something that I really kind of stuck out with me when I first listened to it, that I really wasn't too into, and it kind of sticks with me today as well. I mean, there's a few songs on here that really kind of emphasize that for me, like the song For the Record or White Smoke, for instance, and even Organ Grinder, kind of all have that same feel to them. They're not necessarily, again, they're not bad songs. I still like them, but they, again, just feel like a vehicle for lines versus actual songs. And I think that's another thing that really goes into this and kind of makes this album, it kind of holds this album back a little bit. That's not to say that there's not good songs on here. There's some really fantastic songs where I feel like definitely if the production was better and live, these songs are absolutely amazing. Like I mentioned, there's songs like the Sweet Life is a great song. I mentioned Buffalo 666. That's a fantastic song on here. One of the tracks, Goddamn Kids These Days, is great. I love those tracks, even despite the soft production on here. And the reason I said this is probably one of the most diverse albums that they've done is because you get songs like Host Disorder and Wanderlust, which are these really soulful songs, but also extremely heavy as well. So basically, that's why I say that my experience with this album and my feelings on this album are a little bit mixed, because there's a lot of potential on this album. There's a lot of greatness here, but it just never really comes together. And I feel like a lot of that has to do with the production. I feel like this would have been a much better album if it had been produced a little bit better, if the guitars had kind of stood out a little bit more like they had in the previous albums, if the drumming had actually been there. I feel like this could have been a fantastic 100% album, but I come off feeling a little bit underwhelmed from this album, and that's kind of unfortunate, but there's nothing really particular bad about it. I never really feel like I hate this album or anything like that. Like there's definitely other bands that have done albums that are just not good in one entry, but this is, again, it's just a little bit disappointing, a little bit frustrating as well, because there is so much greatness on here that could have been experienced, but just failed to kind of manifest itself on this actual album. But as far as things go, as far as Every Time I Die albums go, I mean, I'd have to rank this as one of the lower ones. New Junk Aesthetic is an okay Every Time I Die album. It's got its moments. It definitely has some fantastic songs on here, but overall, it's just pretty underwhelming. Thank you guys so much for watching part 5 of the Every Time I Die review series. Stay tuned. Next time we're going to be taking a look at 2012's X Lives.